Hello everybody, and welcome back to my card game tutorial series. In this video, we'll be working on creating a player clone for when we start communicating over a server. So what we're going to do is we're going to mimic what we do on our side of the field on the opponent's side of the field. I don't want you to think that we're just copying what we do on our side of the field and just printing it on the other side. But we're actually going to use the theory of sending message packets to a server without the server being there. So what I mean by that is we're going to create these message scripts, and in the message scripts what we would normally have would be sending this information into a buffer and then sending that buffer to the server, and then that server will send it to the client that we are communicating with. But since we don't have a server set up, what we're going to do is we're going to put the code in this message script that would be at the other client's end. So we're going to do all of the logic that the other client would need to do to accept our messages. And whenever we create our server and client communication, all we'll have to do is copy this code over and paste it into our client scripts. So let's jump into this. So the first thing I want to do is correct something that I thought I had corrected once already. So you may have this corrected on your end, and I just may have not saved it. So in our left released button, we want to take this energy condition and remove it from this for loop. And we want to paste it underneath this trainer condition. With the way it was, it would not work properly. Another thing I want to do is I want to begin to group these scripts because we have so many of them now. So I'm going to group them like this. I'm going to put all of my is scripts into one. I'm going to put all my get scripts into one. All of my hand scripts, which would be draw, mulligan, remove from hand, and hand card select. All of my deck scripts, which would be shuffle deck and draw prize cards, and initialize group, and put all of my initializations the field scripts, which would be pile select, field position, and my miscellaneous scripts that don't fit into any of the others. And then a new one we're going to add is our message scripts. So what we're effectively doing is creating a representation of our opponent. So let's create a new object. We're going to call that object obj opponent. And in that object, we are going to create a create event, and we are going to copy over very similar variables that we had for our player object. So we're going to want to do all of our script initializations. We want a hand counter, a deck counter, and our deck buffers. We want a deck X and Y position. We want to initialize our field card variables, initialize the positions they will be at. We also want to initialize our discard variables. And lastly, we want to initialize a prize array for the opponent's prize cards. We're also going to create a draw event. And just like in our deck object, we are going to draw the opponent's deck, but instead of having a unique object for that, we'll just draw that in the opponent object. We also want to draw the opponent's hand. Another thing we would like to draw is the opponent's discard pile. So we're going to do that exactly how we did it in the discard object for our player. And then lastly, we're going to draw the opponent's prize cards. Now, what we want to do is when the game starts, we want to create this object to be in the room, but we only want to create this object if the player already exists. When we get into our server client coding, this will be moved to when the client is created instead of when the player is created. So this will only be here momentarily. So we're going to put instance create at layer. We don't care where the X and Y positions are. We want to do it to our instances layer, and it's going to be object opponent. And we're going to add a comment that says remove when client server code is added, just so we don't forget. So we have our field cards, but we also want to create a field card for our opponent. So we're going to create a new object, and we're going to call it obj underscore op underscore field underscore card. And this we're going to make exactly like our field card object. Now, we could use the same field card object, but I'm anticipating that our opponent field card will need different logic once we start adding more of the card game logic. So this will just be preemptive. Now, in one way that it will differ is when we print our damage counters, we want the damage counters to be drawn at the bottom of the card instead of the top of the card. So we're going to change our Y's to add these values instead of subtract them. And we're also going to do that for our tokens too. So all of these subtractions will become additions, and these additions will become subtractions. And one thing we want to do is have the card be printed upside down to us. So I'm going to say that the image angle will equal 180. And you'll see what that does later on. Another thing we did in our opponent object that I didn't explain was we used draw sprite extension so that we could do the same for all of these sprites. So our deck sprites will be drawn upside down. Our opponent's hand cards will be drawn right side up. Their discard pile will be drawn upside down, and their prize cards will be drawn upside down. So now let's create our first message. The first message we're going to create is going to be called scr_message hand change. Now all of my message scripts, I'll always have scr_message before them. And I recommend you do that too, so they're easier to find. So when we have these message scripts, we don't want them to compute if the client doesn't exist, so that if we ever want to code a single player version of this game, we can use the same code in our object card, and if this message is called, it won't compute if it's not connected somewhere. So in order to do that, we're going to say if the instance doesn't exist, and that instance would be our client object, we want to return. So if that object doesn't exist, this message won't compute. But we haven't created that object yet, and we won't do that for another few videos. So we're actually going to change this to be object opponent for now. And we're going to change it to object client whenever we do that. So what we would send in this message would be our object player's hand count and our object player's deck count. And when the client receives that, it's going to know to set the object opponent's hand count to equal that value that it just received, and then it's going to also know to set the opponent's deck count to that second value it received. Another thing we may want to send over this message is the entire hand of the opponent. And if we were to do that, we would do it like this. So we would put all of this information into a buffer and then send that buffer to the server, and that server will send it to the opponent's client object. And that client object will unpack this information and lay it out in this player clone. So now let's put this in our game. Where we want this to be is in our draw script. So we actually want to put this draw script in our deck group. And at the end of this script, we want to call this message script message hand change. So let's test this out. Let's see where we currently are. So as you can see, the opponent's deck is being drawn and the opponent's hand card is being drawn. So if I use Bill and I draw 2 cards, we can see that it is maintaining the same hand that I have, except when I discard a card. So we will also want to add this to our discard. So that will be in our object card. And that will be in our left released event. And anytime this event is called, I actually want it to be in this remove from hand script call. So we're going to add that here. So now when we discard a card, it should be more fluid. So when we use Professor Oak, the cards will slowly decrement and then the cards will re-increment. The next message we want to create will be script underscore message underscore field set. And we're going to want to take this same line and add it to each message we create. Now this message is going to take in two arguments. The position, which will be argument 0, and the card num, which will be argument 1. And we're going to say that the opponent object field at position is going to equal card num. And we're going to add this code back in our card object whenever we set a card down, or whenever we play a Pokemon card to the field. So that's going to be in our for loop of the card object left release event above this remove from hand script, and we're going to say script message field set, and we're going to put the position and the card num. Now we also want to add this in the is Pokemon event above this remove from hand script call. Before we test this out, we want to go back to our opponent object and create a step event. And in this step event, we're going to use this code. So what the script is going to do is it is going to go through each position of the opponent's field and see if the field value at that position has been set to something. And if it has been set to something, if no card object exists, it's going to create a card object for that field position. And then it's going to give that card object all of the information it needs, just like we did with our field cards. Now, another condition we want to add is if the field card exists, but the card number at that field position doesn't equal the card number of the card object. If that's the case, that means that card has been evolved. And if that card has been evolved, we want to evolve the card just like we did with our field card. The last condition we want to put is if the field has been cleared, or if that field position has been cleared, and that field card, or the object for that field card, exists, we then want to destroy that field card and set that equal to no one, so that if a card is set to that position, it will fall under this condition. So now that we have that, let's test our game. So now what we should be able to do is set our basic Pokemon onto the field, and as you can see, another field card has been drawn on the other side of the field. So now let's see what happens when I evolve the card. It seems that I may have used the wrong variable in the card object left released button. Yep, I put position instead of field position for when we need to evolve the card. So now that we have that corrected, I should be able to evolve a Pokemon. So let's take Squirtle, Poliwag. Let's evolve Squirtle. As you can see, this card evolved just like this card did. If I evolve it further, it does. And then if I add energy cards, we can see that we haven't created a message for those energy cards. So that's going to be the next message we create. And we're going to call this script underscore message underscore energy add. And we're going to take the first 4 lines of our previous message and paste them into this message. Now, what this message will do is, with the object opponent field card at the position, we are going to set the pile of that card. We're going to increment its pile count, and we're going to set that equal to card num. So what that is doing is it's taking the energy card and adding it to the pile of the card. So now we need to add that to our card object left released event for our energy cards, which is right here. And we're going to do that above the remove from hand script. So we are going to add that script call, field position, and card num. So now let's test that. So if I add Poliwag and then I add an energy onto him, you can see that the water energy symbol is drawn onto the card. Let's see if when we evolve the card, if that messes up. And it doesn't. So the next thing that isn't accounted for yet is our discard pile. So we want to be sure to send that over as well. So the next message we're going to create is script message discard. And what we're going to copy from our previous message is, if the instance doesn't exist, return, and we also want the card number. So we're going to go with object opponent. We're going to set the next discard value to equal that card number. And we are going to add that to our card object alarm 2 event. So right where it says add the card to the discard pile, we are going to add message discard card num. And now let's test that. So what I want you to do is pay attention to this discard position. And when I use Professor Oak, we should see that it should set in order Professor Oak, Poliwag, Bill, Super Energy Removal, and then the double colorless as soon as the card hits the discard pile. And it does. So let's see that one more time. So we have successfully done that. And now the last thing we want to do is create a message for our prize cards. So that message is going to be script message draw prize. And we're going to take that first line of code and copy it over. And what this script will do is take in a value, and we're going to call that value prize num. And we're going to set the opponent object prize array at that prize number, and we're going to set that equal to 1. So in our opponent object, when we draw our prize cards, we only draw it if the prize array is equal to 1 at that position. And then it's going to draw it at each one of the positions we created, which I don't believe we've added yet. So before we test this, we want to add the positions at where our prize cards will be drawn. And these are the coordinates. So now that we have those coordinates, if the prize array position equals 1 at that position, it's going to draw the prize card at that position. So we want to add this message to our prize card object in the step event, in this else statement. We are going to create a condition if the message hasn't been sent, and this is a variable we will create in just a moment. We are going to send the message. And it looks like I misspelled something. And then the value we will send to it is the prize position of this object. And then we're going to set that variable equal to 1. So that means it has been sent, so then it will never send it again. So let's set that variable equal to 0. So we're doing this because we don't want this message to be sent continuously. We only want it to be sent one time, just like all of the other messages. So now that we've done that, that should complete our program for this video. So now we can see that our prize cards are being drawn, our deck's being drawn, our hand is being drawn, the discard pile is being drawn, and our field is being drawn. So that's all I wanted to cover in this video. In the next video, I got a recommendation for creating a way to create a custom deck inside the game. So that's what we'll be going over in the next video. If you have a recommendation or something you want to see in a future video, be sure to leave that in the comments below. If you enjoy the series, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to support the series and download these program files, be sure to check out my Patreon linked in the description below. Until next time.